Use a 10mm socket to remove the nuts that hold the muffler on. Remove the muffler brackets. I'm using my universal socket, so I'm not sure what size these are. Next, I gotta remove this nut right here, and also this shock. You need a 15/16 socket to get this nut off, and you might have to have somebody push down on the bike to put pressure on this tire, otherwise the tire might spin. See the tire spinning? There's a bearing in here. Go ahead and check it for grease while you have this apart. Pull the shock up like this, then this piece comes right out. See that? You have to remove the snap ring first, and then carefully open up the cover so that you can check the bearing for grease. Same thing on this side, snap ring, and then take the cover off, and you can access the bearing. There's a bearing on each side. While you're doing this, if you have the bike outside, this wheel can come right off, so somebody can steal it. So you're gonna have to find some way to chain it or secure it to the bike somehow, so that it can't be easily taken. Plus, if somebody takes it off, then there's nothing supporting the weight of the bike. You need a 10mm socket to loosen up the exhaust. When I got this thing out, clean that damn rust off of there, because they always rust and break. Clean that rust off and then paint it with high temperature paint. Next, gotta remove the fan cover. There's a bolt up here, bolt right there, and there's a bolt down there, over here on this side. And over here, I took these screws out a long time. Get an 8mm socket to remove these bolts that hold the fan on. I might have to hold it so the engine doesn't turn. Gonna need an impact driver to get this nut off of here. At this time, if you'd like, before you go any further, drain the oil out. Because you can't take this cover off with the oil in there because you'll make a mess. It'll go everywhere. You need a 17mm socket to remove that nut, and you have to use an impact driver. Take the puller, it's reverse thread, so you have to turn it counterclockwise for it to screw on. You have to make sure that this part is unscrewed enough. Unscrew this part. See, turning it counterclockwise, it tightens up onto there. You need a 11/16 socket. Put it on here and just turn this and tighten it until the magnet pops off. Might have to try to hold it because it's going to turn the engine. I think it's off now. That's it. That easy. Next you need a 8mm socket to remove the 2 bolts that hold the coil on. Then there's 2 bolts here. There's this bracket here that holds the wire back from the coil so that when the magnet's spinning it doesn't rip up the wires. And you have the contact point here which fires the spark plug. If you're not sure where the stuff goes, take a picture of it on your phone, and that way you can look at that when you go to put everything back together. Now you can remove the coil. As you're taking apart and reassembling things, make sure you clean them up. See, this is pretty dirty in here. Now that you're in here, you might want to consider replacing the crankshaft gasket. I've actually had to take this thing apart after changing the starter clutch to put the new seal in. We got one more step before we can actually get into the motor. There's bolts here. There's a bolt here, there's a bolt here, there's a bolt here, here, all around this cover. Loosen up all those bolts, then the cover will come right off. Put some cardboard underneath because there's probably going to be some oil that will drip out. Grab onto the oil fill cap area and pull on it to break the seal. See, there we go. Look at that. Even though we already drained the oil, look how much oil's still in the damn thing. Crazy. After the oil stops dripping out, pull the cover off. This gear just connects the starter motor to the starter clutch. Here's the starter clutch. Now you have to get the spanner nut removal tool to remove the nut. Remove the old gasket. What the nice thing about this is the old gasket is actually seems to be coming off pretty easy so far. The last time it was a nightmare to get it off. Turn this over on the cardboard to let the oil drain out. And you're going to want to clean this thing up with the greaser. Especially out here, where the magnet and the coil go. Get your spanner nut tool and you try this at your own risk. Listen carefully. This nut is reverse thread, so you have to turn it clockwise to unscrew it. You turn it counterclockwise, then you'll just tighten it up more and you could strip it. And you have to use an impact wrench to get it off so you don't spin the motor, or you'll have to open up the CVT cover and put a wrench on the other side, like I showed you in my previous video that I made like 5 years ago doing the same job. I had to do that because I didn't have this really great tool back then, this impact driver that I got now. So you have to put it on forward to unscrew this thing. See that? That was clockwise and it unscrewed. Unusual setup, but I guess the way the engine rotates, it has to be threaded in reverse, so that way it doesn't unscrew itself over time, I guess. That's the only reason I can think of why that would be reverse thread. Now the starter clutch should pull right out. Grab it from behind because it's two pieces. And there's also a washer there. I'm not sure why this thing went bad because it still seems to work. You turn it one way, and then when you try to turn it the other way, it grabs. But when I tried to start the bike the last time, it was clanking. It made this loud clunking noise. So it's got to be this thing. Even though it still seems to work, it must not be. See, it's two parts. There's a bearing in there. I have no idea how it even grabs. You can see right there. I don't know if the camera will show it. I don't know if it'll show up on the camera, but there's some scoring in the metal there. While you're in here too, inspect this chain for the oil pump. It's supposed to be loose like that. That's normal. The good thing is it's in here, so it's always going to be lubricated by the engine oil. You can take these two bolts off to inspect it. Last time I was in here, I asked about it, and I was told that the oil pump should last the life of the engine, so there's no need to change it or worry about it going out. Here's the new starter clutch, and here is the spanner nut removal tool, and that nut is reverse thread. Put this gear first, and the starter clutch goes in this way. And you get the Woodruff key here that you got to line up with this notch. Woodruff key is right here. Turn this till it lines up. You'll feel it because it won't go in until it hits it. Now it's in. Next you got to clean up around here where the gasket's going to go really good. But you have to be very careful not to damage the aluminum at all. You can't even have any fine scratches. Otherwise you risk the gasket not sealing and then you get an oil leak. You want to get rid of this oil see it keeps coming out? You want to get rid of that oil there because you don't want to have any oil getting onto the new gasket right away. Not when you're trying to get it to seal. I'm going to use some 2000 sandpaper to carefully clean up some of this. After you get the gasket matting area cleaned up, you can put the washer back on. Doesn't really matter, you could do this before or after. And this is reverse thread again, so watch. I turn it counterclockwise and it screws on. Actually, before you put the nut back on, put some Loctite blue. Do not use the Loctite red, or you'll never get this off if you have to go in here again. This is just another precaution to help keep it on here so it doesn't unscrew itself. You don't need a lot, just put a little bit. And this nut is reverse thread, so I'm going to turn it counterclockwise to get it on. My impact driver is 450 foot-pounds, so I have to do this very carefully. I'm just going to give it a slight little snug. That's it. See, that sucker ain't coming off. Next thing you gotta do, get the cover, and you gotta do the same thing. You gotta remove all the old gasket residue to make sure you get a good seal with the new gasket. That might take a while depending on how it fell apart when you took the cover off, because they always do. They don't hold up when you take them off. After you get everything cleaned up the best you can, get the gasket out. Now there's these things here that hold the gasket in place. Unfortunately, during this process I lost one of them that goes here. So I'm going to have to do something else to get it on. I put a bolt in the other hole to hold the gasket in place. Carefully reinstall the cover. Put a little oil on the crankshaft seal. Double check the cover again, make sure there's no junk in it. Clean it the best you can. I'm going to carefully put it back on. You got to make sure the gasket doesn't pop off. You're going to get each bolt hand tight first, and then you're going to tighten them incrementally. Some are longer than others. You'll have to see some are longer than others. You'll have to put them in there, and you'll know if it's too long or too short. See how that one went all the way in and there's only a little bit left? That's how you know that one goes there. Snug it up just until it touches the surface of the cover. bracket back in, bring the coil over. You might be wondering about why I didn't put a bolt here in this hole. The last time I did this, I had some instructions about torquing it and they were wrong, so I ended up stripping it out. But luckily it still works and it doesn't leak. There's no leaks there. I guess it's okay because you got a bolt here and then a bolt down here. This is kind of in the middle, so there's still, I guess, enough tension on there to keep it sealed. Now we have to tighten each bolt incrementally. Now that we have them all in, doesn't really matter. I kind of start at the top, tighten this a little bit, then I'll do the bottom a little bit, and then I would do that one, but I can't anymore, so I'll do this one, then I'll do this one, then I'll do this one here I forgot about. This one's not tight enough yet. Okay, now it is. Now I'll just keep doing this until they're snug. Get them snug, not too tight. Put the 2 bolts back in for the coil. Reattach the pickup coil. 2 little bolts, they look like this, they have small heads. Throw a little Loctite blue on those. Next, we're going to put the magnet back on. Remove the puller. You got to line up the notch with the Woodruff key. Woodruff key's right here. Then there's the point right on top. There's the point right there that hits that and fires the spark plug. And actually, fun little fact, as far as I know, with these engines, the spark plug fires every time that goes around. So even on the exhaust stroke, there's a spark in the cylinder. Get the nut. Gonna need your impact for this. Both of these, the shaft and the nut, are steel here, so you can get them pretty tight if you want. Now you don't have to go crazy. That should do it. Next, gotta put the fan back on. Cool fact about this bike, it's a 2012 and it has over 20,000 miles on it, and the engine still runs perfect. I'm gonna put this piece back on. Before you put it on, make sure that you got the spacer back on. The longer bolt goes on the bottom. After you tighten up these two bolts, come over here. It's a 1/2 inch socket as well, and tighten up the bolt for the shock. After you install the bolt for the rear shock, you have to put this nut back on that goes right here. You need a 15/16 socket for this nut. You're gonna have to have somebody sit on the bike to push the rear wheel down, or push the rear wheel down as you tighten up this nut, otherwise the wheel will spin. Put your breaker bar on there and start tightening it up. See, it spins with the wheel because tightening up this nut is what connects the bearings to the wheel. Now you gotta press the tire down. When you put the fan cover back on, make sure that you reinsert the ground wire, otherwise the bike will not run. These are 8mm as well. Be careful snugging this up so you don't mess up the ground wire. And there's another bolt that goes underneath. Over here, under here, there's another bolt. Put that in. Snug it up. Snug up these two bolts. Put some Loctite glue. And you need a 12mm socket for these. Put the exhaust pipe in. Tighten up the studs a little bit, not too much, because you need to have wiggle room so you can wiggle the exhaust pipe to line it up with the muffler. See, you leave some wiggle room on the exhaust pipe like that. You just tighten up the studs. You just tighten up the studs slightly so that the pipe doesn't fall off, because you're gonna have to wiggle it around to line it up with the muffler, because this part's a pain in the butt. Because it's tricky to hold the muffler and them clamps at the same time. You can see where the old clamps were, and it's a little tricky to keep this rubber in place, but slide it down to here. Doesn't matter right now, that doesn't have to be perfect. Get the other one. Slide it on. Then I'm going to get one of the bolts that screws into the muffler from the exhaust pipe, just to hold it on. Pick it up. Make sure the gasket's in there. Just gonna put in one like that loosely. Grab this clamp. Slide it up. Now this is the part that's a pain, because you have to squeeze the clamp. Make sure this rubber is on correctly. It has a lip that goes around the edges of the clamp. And you have to get the bolt. Here's the bolt here. Put it in. You gotta line it up with the threads. Just screw it in a little bit for now. These I wouldn't put Loctite on because I never have a problem with them getting loose. And both of these parts are steel, so you can tighten them pretty hard. Same thing, squeeze it. Make sure you get it to where the hole is first. Hanging up on something. Remove the bolt from the muffler if you have to. This is giving me a little trouble now. Put it in there and you gotta squeeze it. Line it up with the hole. Just get it started. There we go. Now we can connect these 3 bolts. Should be able to get them to line up now. Might have to slide the muffler down a little bit too. These things are tricky. Sometimes you think they're screwed in, but then they'll pop out because they didn't go in right. You gotta move this back and forth until you get it right. After you get the exhaust pipe tightened onto the muffler, next, gotta tighten up these 2 bolts. These 2 bolts use a 9/16 socket. A 10mm socket and snug up the exhaust studs. When you get all that back together, go ahead and try to start the bike.